The stone floor was cold beneath their bare knees, but the secret they shared burned hotter than any heresy. Monasteries were not sanctuaries of virtue, but complex prisons where faith and flesh fought a silent war. The most sacred vows were often broken not by outsiders, but by the very walls meant to enforce them. They sought the divine, yet discovered a far more potent and dangerous form of human connection. Beneath the centuries of solemn chanting, you can still hear the echo of a forgotten laugh. Imagine the chilling silence settling over the Benedictine cloister as the great wooden door locks you into the medieval night. The air is thick with the scent of aged incense and damp parchment, a perfume of enforced purity. You wear the rough habit, a garment symbolizing absolute removal from the world. Yet the world, its desires, its music, its forbidden indulgences, presses relentlessly against the stone walls. This was the burden placed upon women who sought spiritual refuge, or those who were simply placed there, an absolute surrender to a life defined by ritual and denial. The stakes were not just spiritual, they were existential. From the 5th century onward, convents across Europe were conceived as spiritual citadels, bulwarks against the perceived moral corruption of the secular sphere. They offered security, education, and sometimes a true path to devotion for the noble, the orphaned, and the politically inconvenient. Yet within this framework of rigid control, the human spirit, perpetually resistant to total subjugation, began to seek alternative sustenance. The rules were clear, etched in stone and dogma: chastity, poverty, and obedience. The women who took the veil were drawn from starkly contrasting origins, which often led to internal friction and quiet dissent. Some entered willingly, seeking divine communion. Others were legacies, forced to fulfill a family's obligation or to avoid an undesirable marriage pact. While the spiritual asylum was indeed highly prized, it came at the cost of nearly all personal freedoms. This collision of intent, the devout and the condemned, created the fertile ground for secret histories to be written. The Church's fear of earthly distraction extended even to minor pleasures, labeling most forms of enjoyment, secular music, playful dance, non-devotional literature, as dangerous, sinful temptations. But you, standing in the cold light of the scriptorium, feel a creeping resentment toward the endless severity. How does one maintain equilibrium when the very act of a simple song is seen as a violation of dignity? Rebellion, therefore, began quietly, a slightly richer feast hidden beneath the rough wool, a subtle alteration of the prescribed routine. Consider the deep, cavernous space of the dormitory, where dozens of women slept in rows, separated only by thin curtains, their lives observed even in darkness. It is here, in the oppressive intimacy of shared confinement, that plans began to form. A scrap of parchment might circulate, bearing a secular poem in coded Latin, or a whispered joke about the abbess's severity. These tiny acts of defiance became vital, necessary rituals for psychological survival within the unyielding monastic structure. Historical records occasionally reveal startling breaches of the cloister's integrity, instances where the rigid barrier between the sacred and the profane dissolved. These were not always simple lapses of piety. They often involved elaborate deception. Imagine the meticulous planning, the disguising of visiting merchants or pilgrims who were in fact secret liaisons, allowed inside during periods of heightened pilgrimage. The convent, designed to exclude the world, sometimes became a theater for its entrance. The most powerful transgression often involved sound. Music was inherently dangerous. It stirred the spirit, but could easily lead the heart astray from its primary focus. Nuns were sometimes accused of hearing or performing secular music, melodies that spoke of human love, loss, and the vibrant life outside the walls. This musical defiance was a symbolic battle, the human desire for joy confronting the stern dogma of religious asceticism. The sound of a lute string became the sound of freedom itself. Flooded were violations surrounding the vow of poverty and moderation. The secret feasting, indulging in richer foods than permitted, perhaps acquired through clandestine routes, was not merely gluttony. It was an act of communal bonding and psychological comfort. These forbidden indulgences created temporary pockets of warmth and humanity amidst the perpetual cold of the medieval monastery, offering a brief, tangible reprieve from the mandated deprivations. One of the most profound acts of defiance was intellectual, the writing of secular texts, particularly love poetry, often in elegant Latin. To use the highly valued tool of literacy, reserved largely for the transcription of Holy Scripture, to express forbidden passions was a direct challenge to the Church's control over thought itself. These poems, hidden in prayer books or behind loose stones, are poignant evidence of the quest for authentic self-expression under severe constraint. But such secrets rarely remained buried forever. The moment the clandestine activities came to light, whether through internal betrayal, external rumor, or the discovery of a damning piece of evidence, the idyllic image of the convent collapsed. Public reaction, fueled by religious zeal and deep-seated superstition, shifted instantly from idealized reverence to shock and swift condemnation. The spiritual ideal had been tainted, and the search for the perpetrators began with merciless intent. Church authorities launched stringent investigations, seeking to identify precisely who had violated the strict codes of monastic life. Accusations were wide-ranging, sometimes fueled by superstition, occasionally citing far more sinister actions than simple disobedience, such as the practice of prohibited rituals. The primary goal was not justice, but the swift and visible restoration of the spiritual order. The evidence gathered in these trials was often tenuous, based on rumors, coerced confessions, or the testimony of witnesses seeking to shift blame. Nuns facing investigation were subjected to severe suffering, pressured to admit to every forbidden indulgence. Sometimes they argued fiercely, asserting that their actions were merely an attempt to experience basic human pleasure amidst the life's severe constraints. These trials swiftly transcended the specific violations. They became powerful symbolic battles between inherent human desire and the rigid, unwavering expectations of the religious hierarchy. For the Church, successfully prosecuting these women was essential to maintaining the structural integrity of its moral authority in a time of widespread uncertainty and plague. The individual nun mattered less than the principle she represented. The judgment was frequently predetermined, prioritizing the suppression of dissent over any nuanced understanding of the human condition. When found guilty, the nuns met a tragic end to their monastic peace. The punishments were harsh and designed for maximum public spectacle and internal deterrence. Those condemned faced severe sanctions, including prolonged isolation, the ordeal of public shaming, or even excommunication, the spiritual death sentence. Some were forced to wear garments designed to cause discomfort, such as the hair shirt, and endure ritualized public recitation of their confessions. The objective was the total breaking of the defiant spirit. In some cases, the convicted nuns were ordered to temporary exile from the convent walls, a public declaration of their failure to maintain purity. Upon their return, strict and often punitive reforms were imposed on the community to reinforce discipline, increase surveillance, and violently reassert the Church's demand for absolute spiritual perfection. The aftermath brought immediate changes. The surveillance increased, casting a perpetual shadow over the daily life of the cloister. Windows were barred more securely. Access to the outside world was severed. Though the discipline was reinforced, it left many nuns fearful, resentful, and utterly exhausted by the weight of perpetual suspicion. Yet, these severe measures could not eradicate the stories. Tales of the nuns' defiant acts persisted, filtering into medieval folklore and popular legends. What came next changed everything. These narratives provided an enduring counterpoint to the idealized image of the pious nun, reminding society of the complexity beneath the veil. For the modern historian, these episodes are crucial, illuminating the often contradictory nature of medieval religious life. They prove that piety and deep-seated human desire did not exist in neat, separate spheres, but constantly negotiated boundaries within the same cold stone walls. The rebellious acts, the music, the poetry, the secret moments of fellowship are now viewed as profound acts of resistance against a deeply patriarchal and repressive system. They demonstrate the inherent human need to carve out autonomy and joy, even when life is defined by austerity and ironclad rules. The fragments of secular plays and forbidden songs left behind offer poignant testimony to the universal quest for joy and authenticity, even under the sternest religious dogma. These small, brave acts of the past echo into our present, reminding us that fulfillment often stems from the courage to pursue what others deem impossible. We, as quiet historians, do not seek to sensationalize the downfall, but to understand the profound emotional complexity. The cold stones of the medieval convent hold centuries of silence, but within that silence, the compelling stories of human resilience remain etched in the archival parchment. These historical revelations about the collapse of monastic purity confirm the ultimate fragility of absolute power and absolute control. Where rules become too restrictive, the natural response of the human spirit is not compliance, but the ingenious, subtle search for an escape route. This video was created for educational and historical purposes. It examines themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. The darkness of the medieval age tried to extinguish these moments of light and defiance. If this story made you reflect on fragility of power, stay with us for the next chapter as we continue to walk further into history's shadows.